started with champagne and ended with glass in my hand. There was something artificial about that night from the beginning, like a stage play where every actor knew their line except me. We were at her company's annual gala, an obnoxiously over-the-top affair held in a rented mansion with chandeliers that cost more than my car. I wasn't even supposed to be there. She told me it was just a work thing and that I'd probably be bored. But something in her voice had been off lately, like she was always 5 seconds from hanging up when I called, always one step ahead in a conversation I didn't know we were having. I told her I was coming anyway. She didn't argue. When I arrived, she was already deep in conversation with a man I'd never seen. He was laughing like they shared a secret. His hand was on her back, low where it had no business being. She didn't flinch, didn't even move, just looked over and smiled as if nothing was out of place. Like I was the valet and not the man she was supposed to marry in 4 months. She introduced me in a way I'll never forget. Not with warmth, not even with pride, but like I was some reluctant piece of luggage she was forced to acknowledge. "This is Eric," she said, her tone carefully neutral, her eyes flicking back to the man as if to apologize for my existence. "He does coding stuff." The man, tall, slick, the kind who probably narrates his own life like a movie, just nodded like he understood everything about me in that one word. Coding stuff. I should have walked out then. I should have left her there in her borrowed dress and curated lies. But I didn't. I watched her glide away with him to the bar, saw the way she leaned in too close when he whispered something. And still I stayed, because I needed to know. Halfway through the evening, I caught her telling some story to a group of coworkers about our first vacation. Except it wasn't our story. Not really. She changed the details, swapped out the location, exaggerated the problems, made me sound like a helpless idiot who got sunburned and lost the rental car keys. They all laughed. She laughed the loudest. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. I think she forgot I was there. Then came the toast. One of her managers got up to give a speech, standard nonsense about teamwork, growth, the future. But then he called her up, said she was a star, that she'd taken on new responsibilities in the past few months and proved herself indispensable. New responsibilities. I watched her take the mic, watched her eyes scan the crowd until they landed on me. And I swear, in that moment she hesitated. Just slightly, like a glitch in a rehearsed performance. Then she smiled wide, fake, full of teeth. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support," she said to the room. And of course to my fiancé, who's been so patient, even if he doesn't always understand what I really do. More laughter. It was meant to be light, a joke, but it hit like a brick to the chest. I stood up, not to make a scene, not to shout, just to leave. But when I turned, I caught the man from earlier watching her. The look on his face wasn't admiration. It was ownership. That's when it hit me. I walked straight to her. People stepped aside like they could sense something boiling. She turned, surprised, half a word still on her lips. "Who is he?" I asked. She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Who is he?" Her expression didn't crack. Not once. She just stared, eyes wide like a cornered animal. But her voice stayed calm, almost amused. "Eric, not here. That man. The one who's been touching you all night like he's got a key to your apartment. Who is he?" She stepped closer, lowered her voice to a hiss. "You're making a scene." I leaned in. "Good." And then she said it. The sentence that lit the match I didn't know I was holding. "If you were half the man he is, maybe I wouldn't have to keep explaining myself all the time." I didn't slap her. I didn't yell. I just stepped back, nodded once, and took off the ring, held it out in my hand. "Then give this to him." I dropped it on the floor between us and walked out into the night, not knowing what I just detonated, or how deep the wreckage would go. But that was only the surface. The real truth was waiting for me at home. The ride home felt like I was driving underwater. Everything was muffled, unreal. I don't even remember the turns I made. Just the steady hum of the engine and the metallic taste in my mouth. My phone buzzed twice in my pocket, her obviously, but I didn't look. I wasn't ready to hear her spin her way out of what just happened. I needed silence. I needed clarity. What I got instead was something else entirely. When I finally stepped into the apartment, the first thing I noticed was the perfume. Not hers, the usual floral cloud was gone. This one was sharper, unfamiliar, and it clung to the hallway like it didn't care if it was welcome or not. I stood still, breathing it in, not sure what the hell I was smelling. Something told me to walk slow. Our bedroom door was ajar. One side of the bed looked slept in. Her side. Mine was untouched. That wasn't unusual. She often stayed up late after I went to sleep. But there was something different now. I opened the closet and saw it immediately. A second men's jacket. Not mine. It was hanging there like it belonged, like it had always been there, like it had a right. Navy blue, way too broad in the shoulders to be mine. I reached out and touched the fabric. Still warm. I pulled it down and rifled through the pockets. A receipt from a coffee shop across town. Dated that morning. 2 cups, 1 muffin. I hadn't had breakfast with her in weeks. I wasn't even mad. Not yet. Not really. What I felt was worse. I felt the vacuum of certainty. The kind of moment when everything you thought you knew folds in on itself. I wasn't looking for proof, not consciously. But it was like the house was tired of hiding it for her. I checked her desk drawer. Her laptop was gone. That was strange. She never took it to parties. Then I opened the side drawer. A flash drive. Unlabeled. I plugged it into my computer, telling myself I wouldn't find anything. That I'd just prove I was being paranoid. There were 3 folders. One labeled expenses, one labeled photos, and one just named M. I opened photos first. First, nothing unusual. A few selfies, group shots from work events, even one of us from a weekend hike months ago. But then I scrolled down and there they were. Pictures from an apartment I didn't recognize. Low lighting. Candles. Her. Laughing, drinking wine, wearing the dress she told me had gone missing in the laundry. Then another photo. Not posed. Taken from a low angle. Her head thrown back. Laughing. Hands tangled in someone else's. His face wasn't in it. But I didn't need to see it. He had the jacket. The coffee receipt. The smug eyes from across the party. I clicked back and opened the M folder. Inside were screenshots, messages. Not text messages. Some kind of work chat, encrypted maybe. But she had saved them. All of them. Flirty at first. Then personal. Then filthy. And then one message that cracked something in me. You should have just moved in with me already. He's a ghost. He doesn't even see you. Her reply? Soon. Just waiting for the right explosion. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. My heart didn't even race. It was too quiet. I remember looking at my hands. They weren't shaking. I wanted them to. I wanted some kind of physical reaction, something dramatic. But there was nothing. Just the weight of it. Then I heard her key in the door. Everything in me tensed. I yanked the flash drive out and put it back exactly where I found it. I closed the closet. Reset the room like a crime scene I hadn't disturbed. She walked in, heels off, mascara smudged. Her voice came soft, rehearsed. Eric, can we talk? I stood in the living room and just looked at her. I had no idea what was about to come out of my mouth. But I knew it wouldn't be forgiveness. And I knew, deep down, she had no idea I already knew. She didn't look guilty when she spoke. That was the first thing that hit me. Not guilt. Not fear. Not even surprise. She looked calculated. Like she'd been practicing lines in the mirror on the drive home. She walked in slow, like we were in some kind of indie film, her eyes glossy like she wanted to seem fragile. But her mouth had that twitch it always did when she was about to lie. Eric, look, she started, dropping her purse on the counter like we weren't on the edge of disaster. I know what happened tonight was dramatic, but you really overreacted. I was just joking. Everyone jokes about their partner at those things. It's normal. It's like banter. I didn't answer. I just watched her. And I think the silence unnerved her more than yelling would have. She took a breath, walked toward me. Slower now. Can we please just talk about this like adults? You embarrassed me in front of my entire team. I let that sit in the air between us for a few seconds. Then I said, calmly, "You're right." She blinked. "What?" "You're right," I repeated. "I embarrassed you. And I'm sorry." She softened immediately, relief flashing across her face like she thought she'd won. "Thank you." I cut her off. "I'm sorry you had to pretend I mattered to people who clearly mean more to you than I ever did. That must have been exhausting." The color started draining from her cheeks. She tilted her head. Eric, come on. I found the jacket. Her mouth closed. I found the jacket, the photos, the messages, and the folder named M. Now she went still, not blinking, not breathing, just perfectly still. And then came the shift. She didn't cry. She didn't deny. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she laughed. Not loud. Just a quiet, bitter chuckle under her breath. I knew I should have taken that damn drive with me. You saved it, I said. Why? Because part of me wanted to get caught, she said, her voice sharpening. Because I was tired of babysitting a man who couldn't keep up. You just existed. That's all you did, Eric. You took up space. You were always exactly where I left you. Like a bookmark in a book I was never going to finish. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even sadness. It was like she'd taken a blade and carved out the final piece of me that still believed in her. That final thread gone. She walked past me into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine. You want the truth? She said. Fine. Yes. I've been seeing him. For months. And yes, we stayed in the apartment while you were visiting your sister. And no, I don't feel bad about it. He listens. He actually does things. He doesn't talk about code like it's a religion. I stepped closer. Why stay? I asked. Why not leave? She sipped. Because you were safe. And pathetic. And pathetic people don't ask questions. I nodded slowly. Right? Then I picked up the flash drive from her drawer and held it up. This goes to your HR department in the morning, I said. You really should have been more careful with company chat logs. Her eyes widened. First panic. Then fury. You wouldn't. You think I'm going to just walk away and let you rewrite the ending? I said. You wanted an explosion. Let's make it a beautiful one. She slammed the glass on the counter. You are such a child. No, I said. I was a man who believed you were something you're not. That ends tonight. She stepped toward me, finger raised like she had more venom to spit, but stopped, because this time I didn't back down. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I opened the door. Out, I said. Take your wine and your stories and get out. And for once in her carefully scripted life, she didn't have a line ready. She didn't move. Not right away. She just stood there, clutching the wine glass like she thought it made her look composed, like it gave her some kind of leverage. But her eyes were scanning, calculating, shifting between the door and me, trying to find a foothold. There wasn't one. The silence between us stretched into something unbearable. She was used to winning arguments by exhaustion, by wearing me down, not blowing me up. She finally set the glass down with a deliberate clink, picked up her bag, and laughed again. But this time it cracked. It didn't sound like control. It sounded like static. You think this makes you the strong one? She said, not turning to look at me. You think this little tantrum earns you back your dignity? I didn't answer. I just held the door open. You don't even know what he promised me, she went on, slower now. He offered me a job. A real one. Not some dead-end desk role like you've been stuck in for years. He's got connections. He sees me. I saw you, I said. That was the problem. She flinched. Just barely. But enough. She walked out without another word. And I closed the door, quietly, gently, like I was sealing off a tomb. I locked it, double-checked it, then sat on the couch without turning on the lights. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like I was walking through someone else's life. I thought I'd feel relief. I didn't. I felt hollow. She had twisted the narrative so many times I'd forgotten which parts of our life were real. I didn't know if she ever actually loved me, or if I was just an interim, a placeholder until something shinier came along. But the strange thing was I didn't cry. Instead, I did something worse. I started remembering. The time she surprised me at work with lunch. The weekend we stayed in bed all day laughing at dumb movies. The night I first told her I loved her and she didn't say it back right away but pulled me in close instead. Those memories weren't fake. They were just borrowed. And I realized she was never in those moments. Not the way I was. I was building a future. She was collecting experiences. At around 2 a.m., I finally opened the expenses folder on the flash drive. It wasn't just receipts. It was spreadsheets, dates, amounts, details, even hotel names. She'd logged every interaction. Like a ledger. Like an investment. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning. I stared at the screen and understood something that chilled me to the bone. This had been her way out. Slowly eroding the foundation, one mockery at a time, one absence after another, until I either crumbled or exploded. But I didn't crumble. I didn't explode. I documented. I printed copies of the logs. I forwarded the emails to my private inbox. I started drafting a message to her company's ethics board. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted a clean break. But then, just before sunrise, I got a message. From him. It was from an unlisted number. No greeting. Just one line. She told me you'd do this. Stay out of it. My blood froze. He knew who I was. He knew what I was planning. And she had already weaponized me before I ever struck. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched, suddenly realizing. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a setup. And the game wasn't over. I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute. That message sat on the screen like a spiderweb, thin and deadly. I read it over and over, trying to decipher whether it was a warning or a bluff, or something worse. She told him I'd do this. She'd anticipated everything. Not just the confrontation. Not just the ring on the floor. She had predicted my response down to the email drafts and flash drive. And he was now stepping into the ring not with charm, but with control. With pressure. With a threat. But he'd made one mistake. He assumed I was the same man I had been yesterday. I sat at my desk as the sun broke over the window, watching light crawl across a framed photo of us at the lake. I didn't move it. I wanted to look at the lie. I wanted to see it fully now, not blurred by the fantasy I'd fed myself for so long, but with clarity, with purpose. By 8 a.m., I was at the coffee shop on the receipt. I wanted to see it for myself. I needed to. The barista recognized the jacket when I showed him a picture. Yeah, he said. Guy comes in all the time. Real smooth talker. Always with the same woman. Blonde. Laughs like she owns the room. I asked if they ever seemed odd. Paranoid. Secretive. The barista leaned in a little. Actually, yeah. He always pays in cash. Tells her to use a different name when ordering. What name? Mel. Mel. That explained the M folder. I walked out with my heart pounding. I didn't know what I was going to do with this information yet, but I knew it was ammunition. I went back home and opened a new folder, mine this time. I labeled it Exit. Inside, I started saving everything. Her fake name usage, the dates matching the receipts, photos from the flash drive, his message. I started crafting a report. Not for HR. Not just for HR. For legal counsel. I had a friend, Nate, who used to be a corporate investigator. We weren't close, but he owed me a favor from a few years back. I texted him one sentence. Need a quiet consult.
Urgent.
Personal. He called 10 minutes later. I gave him the outline. Left names out at first. Then gave them. He went quiet for a moment. Then, Eric, you're not in a breakup. You're in a situation. I asked him what that meant. She didn't just cheat on you. She got involved with someone who's probably using her. Or maybe they're using each other. Either way, he's connected. I've heard that name before, Mel. Not short for Melissa. Short for Melnick. Guy moves in elite circles. Tech finance, private capital. He's got more shell companies than fingerprints. I stared at the wall. You're telling me she's with someone dangerous? I'm telling you, Nate said. Be very careful about what you send, and who you send it to. And whatever you do, don't confront them again. Not alone. I hung up, and for the first time, I realized I had to stop thinking like a heartbroken fiancé and start thinking like a man being hunted. That night, I didn't turn on any lights in the apartment. I sat in the dark with every device disconnected from Wi-Fi, my phone in airplane mode, and every file backed up 3 ways. Around 11 p.m., a car pulled up outside the building, parked, didn't move. I watched it from behind the curtain. It stayed there for 46 minutes. Then it drove off. I wasn't paranoid. They were watching. And suddenly, it was no longer just about betrayal. It was about survival. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in under the excuse of a family emergency, and I didn't feel even a flicker of guilt. I wasn't operating on normal anymore. The world I had stepped into wasn't built on calendars or commutes. It was shifting, unstable, like the ground beneath me had been replaced with ice. and I was still expected to walk like nothing changed. My goal that day was simple. Find out who exactly Mel was, and what kind of power he held over her. Over me. Because I knew now, this wasn't just infidelity. This was strategy. She didn't fall into someone else's arms. She maneuvered, aligned herself with something bigger, something she thought would elevate her. And she tried to use me as her decoy. By noon, Nate had sent me a preliminary dig. Mel, short for Mason Melnick. Private equity. Shell firms. Clean public record, but scattered lawsuits under former partners' names. Settlements. Quiet payouts. A few bankruptcies that never hit the headlines. Women involved in some of the filings, names redacted. One in particular that stood out. Woman reported being coerced into signing documents she didn't understand. She disappeared halfway through the case. He was the kind of man who wore a perfect suit and carried a briefcase full of secrets. Nate said, "Don't contact him. Ever." I asked him if this kind of man would be watching me. He said, "If she fed him your background, your routines, your job, yes. You were the dry run. He knows how you react. And that gives him control." I told Nate about the car. About the late-night stop. About the message. He paused. "You're being sized up. Maybe as a threat. Maybe as a liability. Either way, if they think you're gonna blow this open, they'll try to discredit you first. Humiliate you. Make you unstable. Or worse. Only if you don't play smart." I spent the next 6 hours locking down everything. New bank passwords. Closed 2 old accounts. Froze my credit. Changed the locks on my apartment. Installed 2 cameras, one above the front door, one in the living room. I started writing out the timeline. Not just for lawyers. For myself. To see how deep the rot went. First inconsistencies. 8 months ago. Late-night work sessions. 6 months. First appearance of Mel. 5 months. First lie I could confirm as absolute fiction. A fake weekend seminar 3 months ago. That weekend I'd taken care of her sick dog while she networked. I looked at the dog, asleep on the floor next to the couch. He was the only thing in this apartment that hadn't lied to me. By evening, the silence was oppressive. The kind that presses in behind your eyes, like you're waiting for something to break. I kept checking the window. Every sound outside made my pulse jump. But no car this time. Instead, I got an email. No subject. From a burner address. Just one image attached. It was me. From earlier that day. In the coffee shop. Taken from outside the window. Through the glass. My face turned, clearly visible. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't surveillance. This was intimidation. They weren't just watching. They wanted me to know. I sent the image to Nate. His reply was immediate. "They're escalating. Send me everything. Now." I uploaded all files to an encrypted drive and sent it to him. Then I packed a single bag. Essentials. Documents. Clothes. Left the apartment. Didn't turn off the lights. Let it look lived in. I drove to a cheap roadside motel 3 towns over. Paid in cash. No ID. Inside, I locked the door, pushed a chair against it, and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. My life had been gutted. My home no longer safe. My relationship exposed for the machinery it was. And yet I wasn't falling apart. I was reconstructing. And the fire I felt now wasn't grief. It was cold, clean purpose. I had one objective left. I was going to dismantle the version of her they built. The motel room smelled like bleach and stale carpet, and I didn't sleep. I sat in the stiff chair under a flickering lamp, reading through everything again, her messages to him, his cryptic threat, the financial patterns Nate had flagged. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I was looking for a lever, something I could pull that would shift the weight back into my hands. At 5:32 a.m., I found it. It was buried in one of the earlier emails, sent from her personal Gmail to what looked like a work address, but Nate had run the domain already. It wasn't real. A shell inbox. Likely one Mel used for operations he didn't want traced. But what stood out wasn't the message. It was the file she attached. A document labeled Client Index Alpha. I opened it. Inside was a table. Names, account numbers, brief notes. And under one entry, near the bottom, was a name I recognized. Not from my world, but from hers. Her boss. The same one who praised her at the gala. The one who gave her a promotion 6 weeks ago. And beside his name, a line. $60K wire via proxy. NDA signed. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't even just fraud. This was leverage, blackmail, or worse, collaboration. She wasn't just someone's pawn. She was in on it. She'd become part of something much larger. And that document was insurance. Or currency. I picked up my phone, used a secure line Nate had set up, and called him. He answered on the first ring. Talk. I explained the document. He didn't even pause. That's your exit ticket. But you have to play it perfectly. You go to the police, they bury it. You go public, they smear you. But if you leak this to someone who has no choice but to act, press, internal audit, anyone under legal obligation to investigate, it becomes radioactive. They can't touch you without stepping into their own fire. He sent me a contact, a name I won't write here, but they worked internal compliance at a major regulatory agency. I was told to send it anonymously through a secure Dropbox. I did it within the hour. By midday, I received confirmation it had been received. And then nothing. No retaliation. No knock at my motel door. No burner emails. Just silence. Until 4:47 p.m. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You really think you've won anything? I stared at it for a moment, then replied, I haven't won, but you've started to lose. No response. But later that night, while scrolling news under a private browser, I found it. Not front page, not yet, but tucked into a financial blog with good sources. Anonymous tip prompts internal probe into corporate fraud at redacted group. It had begun. She didn't message me. Not a single word. No apology. No threats. Nothing. But Nate called me 2 hours later with something better. She's been suspended. Not fired. Not yet. But they're pulling her records. And him. Unconfirmed. But I hear he's out of town. Fast. Quiet. Probably prepping for damage control. I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel relief. What I felt was balance. Like I had been suffocating under this weight for months and now, finally, the air had cleared. But it wasn't over. Because the next morning I got a letter. No postage. Hand-delivered under the motel door. 1 page. Her handwriting. I didn't expect you to actually fight back. That was always the part one underestimated. You were never the man I needed, but I guess you were the man I deserved. Congratulations. Enjoy your little war. I'm done playing. It wasn't signed. I burned it in the sink. The motel started to feel like a bunker. Not a refuge, just a place between moments, between moves. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was waiting. The difference was subtle but sharp. I had thrown the stone into the pond. Now I was watching the ripples spread. Nate called again late that evening. His tone was more serious than before. We've got a problem, he said. Not immediate, but you need to hear it. I paced the narrow floor, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Go. She's not out. She's maneuvering. Damage control. Spin. Distancing herself from Melnick publicly. But from what I've seen, she's already floated a version of the story to internal staff that frames her as an unwilling participant. She's playing the victim card. I almost laughed. She's saying what? That she was manipulated. That she was coerced, pressured. Claimed she was in too deep before she knew what was happening. I sat on the edge of the bed, jaw tight. She had spreadsheets, organized data, messages that show her enjoying it. Nate didn't speak for a second. Then, doesn't matter. Public perception isn't about truth. It's about the strongest narrative delivered first. And she's already building hers. The timing made sense. The silence wasn't defeat. It was calculation. She'd realized she couldn't stop the leak, so she was reshaping the aftermath. I needed leverage that couldn't be reinterpreted. Nate said, You still have the flash drive? Yes. Good. We're going to prep it as evidence. Chain of custody. Time-stamped backups. We'll send it through the right channel this time. But in the meantime, stay low. Stay quiet. Let them move first. He hung up, but I didn't listen to the second half of that advice. Because I wasn't built to wait anymore. The next morning, I drove to the city. Parked a few blocks from her building. Wore a cap, sunglasses. I wasn't there to confront her. I just needed to see her. to understand the shape she'd taken now that the facade had cracked. I watched her exit the lobby at 9:06 a.m. sharp. Not frazzled. Not broken. Confident. New coat. Hair different. Sunglasses like armor. Talking on the phone as if the world still rotated around her gravity. It did, in a way. She turned the corner and stepped into a black car. Not Melnick's. Not one I recognized. But clean. Private. Expensive. She was rebuilding already. Like a queen escaping a castle on fire. Only to find a new one waiting. That's when I made the decision. I went home. Not the motel. Home. The apartment was cold. The lights were still on. I shut them all off and started packing what was left. She'd taken her things already, but she'd left behind traces. Receipts, notes, small personal items. I bagged it all. Not out of pettiness. Out of strategy. Everything was evidence now. Every scrap might contradict her version of the story. Then I found the notebook. It was wedged between cookbooks in the kitchen drawer. Inside, handwritten notes. Lists. Not for groceries. For people. Events. Strategic commentary. One line stuck out like fire on a white page. If Eric gets suspicious, redirect. Use old debt excuse. Cry if needed. She'd practiced responses. Rehearsed manipulation. Like a chess game, she'd mapped 10 moves in advance. That notebook went into a folder I marked Final. And that night, I didn't go back to the motel. I stayed in the apartment. I wanted her to come back. I needed her to. And sometime past midnight, there was a knock. Soft. Deliberate. I stood in the dark, holding the notebook. Opened the door. There she was. Rain-soaked, makeup minimal, eyes shining with something that wasn't regret, but performance. I just want to talk, she said, and I stepped aside. Not to forgive. To finish this. She stepped into the apartment like it still belonged to her. Like the last week had been a pause rather than a collapse. She didn't even glance around. Didn't ask how I was. She walked straight to the living room and sat down, crossing her legs like a guest in a place she once ruled. I watched her in silence. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed prepared. Her hair was still damp from the rain, but the coat she wore was expensive, pristine. There was no vulnerability here, just poise sharpened into performance. I'm not here to fight, she said, placing her bag beside her carefully. You need to understand that things moved faster than I expected. It wasn't supposed to get this messy. I stayed standing. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. Her voice shifted slightly, softened, like she was trying to pull me back into some familiar script. I made mistakes, Eric. Big ones. I own that. But I also got used. Mel, he's not who I thought he was. Once I realized that, it was already too late, and I panicked. You panicked? I repeated, voice flat. Yes, she nodded. You have no idea the kind of pressure I was under. He threatened me. Said if I didn't help him, he'd ruin me. I was scared. That's why I kept records, those files, the messages, the drive. That was my safety net. You said in one of those messages, I interrupted. You were just waiting for the right explosion. That sound like fear to you? That got her. A tiny crack in the mask. Her mouth twitched before she could stop it. I was emotional when I said that, she said quickly. You know how I get. I didn't mean it literally. I'm not interested in how you get. I'm interested in what you did. Silence settled for a moment. Then she looked up at me, and the warmth in her voice dropped away. You want to destroy me? No, I said, stepping closer, the notebook in my hand. You destroyed yourself. I just finally moved out of the way. She noticed the notebook then. Her eyes narrowed. Where did you get that? You left it behind, I said, right next to your recipe for lemon risotto and how to manipulate me into silence. That was private. Nothing about you is private anymore. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw locked, but she didn't stand. She didn't fight back the way I expected. Instead, she tilted her head and tried a new strategy. One that had worked before. Eric, she said with that quiet, measured voice. We had something. You can pretend it was all fake, but it wasn't. There were real parts, moments. You loved me. I did, I replied. But you, what did you love? The comfort? The usefulness? You were safe. she said simply. You didn't ask too many questions. You let me be whatever I needed to be. And now? I asked. Now I don't need you, she said, standing. But I do need you to stay quiet. You think taking this to lawyers and regulators is going to help you? It'll blow back on you too. People don't care who cheated. They care who looks bitter. You'll be the sad ex with a grudge. I'll be the woman who got pulled into something over her head. She took a step toward me, calm, smooth, like a diplomat at war. So let's end this. Quietly. Walk away. You keep your dignity. I keep my job. And maybe in time we both forget. It was perfect. Perfect manipulation. Perfect projection. And so incredibly predictable. I smiled. Then I handed her a USB drive. What's this? She asked, frowning. A copy of the files I didn't send yet, including the updated ones. Audio. Your voice, just now. You're recording me? You walked into my apartment. Of course I'm recording you. She stared at the drive like it was poison. I'm giving you one chance, I said. Walk away from all of it. Resign. Vanish. Leave your golden boy. Shut it all down. I don't send this. But if I hear even one whisper that you're playing victim again, this goes everywhere. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes were glassy, not from sadness, from calculation, from watching her board flip over midgame. Then she turned, and without another word, she walked out. I didn't follow. I just watched the door click shut and knew this time it wasn't coming back open, that I didn't move for a long time after the door shut. Just stood there, staring at it, like it might open again with one final trick up its sleeve. But it didn't. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I wasn't reacting. I was done reacting. She was gone. And this time, she hadn't taken anything worth keeping. In the days that followed, the fallout rippled out quietly, like a tide pulling back after a long, violent storm. Nate confirmed it first. Her resignation had gone through. Official story? Burnout. Overwhelmed by the pressures of a demanding project. No scandal. No headlines. Just a neat little bow for the company to tie it all off with. But behind the scenes, there was panic, investigations, audits, digital forensics. Mel disappeared entirely. Off-grid. His apartment vacated, his last transaction traced to a private jet out of the state. That alone told me how high up the rot went. People like him don't vanish unless they know what's coming. I didn't send the rest of the files. Not yet. I'd made my point. The threat was real, and they knew it. Sometimes the win isn't about exposing everything. It's about making sure they know you can. A week later, I moved out of the apartment. Packed up what little hadn't been poisoned by her presence. Gave the dog to a friend who could care for him full-time. He deserved better than a place that held so much weight. I didn't cry when I handed him over. I'd done all my bleeding already. What stuck with me most wasn't the betrayal. It was how surgical it had been. How clinical. Like she'd dissected me piece by piece and filed away the parts she could use. There was no heat in what she did, just hunger. That was the hardest part to face. That someone could stand beside you every day and not just lie, but plan. But even that, in time, became background noise. I went back to work. Slowly, at first. Colleagues asked, I gave vague answers. Things ended. Needed time. Moved on. No one pushed. And even if they did, I had no interest in retelling the story. The truth was mine now. My weapon. My armor. Sometimes I caught myself imagining what she might say about me now. Spinning her tale in some wine bar or whispered brunch. How she might frame me as controlling, unstable, jealous. Maybe she'd even believe it. But it didn't matter anymore. Because I knew what I was. I was the man who got out. Not early. Not clean. But out. And if I had one piece of advice for anyone who reads this, for anyone who feels like something's off in their relationship but can't quite prove it, don't ignore the small things. Don't explain away the jokes at your expense, the cold silences, the invisible walls she builds while still smiling at you across the room. Don't let love become an alibi, because sometimes the person beside you isn't a partner. Sometimes they're just hiding the detonator until you finally light the fuse for them. And if they do, make sure they remember who walked away from the fire and who survived it.